No one expected this kind of bold move from Keir Starmer. Just minutes ago, a decision from his camp set off alarms inside one of the most powerful institutions in the country, the Bank of England. What Starmer tried to do wasn't just another policy shift. It was seen by many as a direct attempt to tighten government control over how people's bank accounts could be managed, monitored, or even restricted in the name of security and fairness. But was it truly about public good, or quiet control? The idea reportedly started as part of a larger financial reform package aimed at increasing transparency and trust in the banking system. Starmer's plan suggested that all high-risk bank accounts should be reviewed under new digital monitoring systems. While the goal, according to Labour spokespeople, was to prevent fraud, illegal wealth storage, and money laundering, critics immediately raised one major red flag: who defines high risk, and how far could this go? Under the proposal, the government would work closely with banks to monitor account activity in real time. Accounts flagged for suspicious patterns could be temporarily frozen without prior warning. What triggered even more concern was a small clause buried deep in the draft proposal. It allowed ministers to authorize freezing of accounts without court approval under emergency economic conditions. That's when the word power grab began trending across platforms. This wasn't just about fighting crime or fraud. This was seen by many as a dangerous step towards centralized financial control. If the government could shut down your bank account overnight without legal process, what happens to freedom? To privacy? To basic economic safety? Labor officials defended the move, calling it a necessary modernization step in a changing global financial environment. They argued that most law-abiding citizens had nothing to fear and that the measures were designed to protect, not punish. But the backlash was instant. Small business owners, tech experts, and civil liberty groups lined up to question the timing, the wording, and the real goal behind the move. Some called it a digital financial surveillance plan disguised as reform. Others warned that it would open the door for political abuse, where dissenters or critics could be financially crippled with a signature. Even members of Starmer's own party appeared uneasy. A few MPs reportedly pushed back behind closed doors, urging caution and demanding clearer boundaries. In just a few hours, what started as a quiet reform initiative had turned into a national conversation and a political firestorm. The most chilling part? The real resistance hadn't even arrived yet, because the Bank of England, fiercely independent and fiercely protective of its role, was about to step into the ring. And they weren't going to stay quiet. The response from the Bank of England was not just swift, it was a warning shot. Within hours of Starmer's proposal making headlines, the bank issued a rare and strongly worded public statement. In calm but firm language, the central bank reminded the government and the public that its independence was not up for negotiation. The bank's statement read, "The Bank of England maintains full operational autonomy over financial regulations and oversight. Any attempt to interfere with this independence could compromise the nation's economic stability and public trust in financial institutions." Behind the scenes, sources revealed that the bank's top leadership was deeply alarmed by the emergency clause buried in Starmer's proposed plan, the one that allowed ministers to freeze bank accounts without prior legal approval. For the bank, this wasn't just a policy difference. It was seen as a direct threat to the balance of power between the government and financial regulators. Senior officials at the bank immediately began private consultations with legal advisors, financial experts, and even international observers. The concern wasn't only domestic. If foreign investors or global markets sensed that the UK government was tightening its grip on private banking activity, it could trigger fear, instability, or even capital flight. In simpler words, people, especially the wealthy and businesses, could begin moving their money out of the country to avoid sudden restrictions. Former bank governors also weighed in. Lord Mervyn King, who led the bank during the 2008 financial crisis, gave a rare media interview warning of authoritarian shadows creeping into what should be a neutral and rules-based system. He asked bluntly, if the government starts deciding whose bank accounts to freeze, where does it end? Economists echoed these fears. The financial markets depend on stability, clarity, and trust. Any sense that political motives could interfere with private assets is seen as dangerous. It invites not just public backlash, but economic consequences, from lower investor confidence to rising borrowing costs for the entire country. To add to the pressure, the Financial Conduct Authority, FCA, reportedly began its own review of the proposal. Though the FCA did not publicly criticize the plan, internal memos suggested they were preparing to push back if the proposals moved forward without significant revisions. Meanwhile, news of the bank's opposition began spreading fast. Major financial outlets like Bloomberg and the Financial Times ran headlines declaring that the UK's financial independence was under pressure. International economists started warning that if the Bank of England was forced to bow to political pressure, it could damage Britain's global credibility. In just one day, what was supposed to be a quiet policy launch turned into a constitutional standoff. It was no longer just about protecting citizens' accounts. It had now become a battle between the government's ambition and the Bank of England's authority. And Starmer? He wasn't backing down. But the clock was ticking, and the next move could determine whether this bold gamble would redefine his legacy or destroy his political momentum. As the Bank of England's response sent shockwaves through financial circles, the political and public backlash quickly followed. Within hours, Starmer's reform plan was being torn apart, not just by opposition parties, but also by members of his own Labour camp. What was meant to position him as a bold reformer was now being painted as an overreach. Some even called it a quiet test run for financial authoritarianism. The Conservative Party was the first to strike. Tory frontbenchers called it a dangerous abuse of government power, accusing Starmer of trying to undermine British financial traditions that date back centuries. One MP stated bluntly in Parliament, "This is not modernization. This is control masked as reform." Others suggested it was a distraction from Labour's failure to offer real solutions to inflation, rising taxes, and household debt. Reform UK seized the opportunity too. Their leader accused Starmer of setting the stage for a digital lockdown of people's finances. On social media, hashtags like #BankGrab and #HandsOffOurAccounts began trending, fueled by influencers, commentators, and even celebrities weighing in on what they called a terrifying direction for British democracy. But the real blow came when voices from within Labour itself began expressing concern. At least 4 senior Labour MPs reportedly met with Starmer privately, urging him to clarify the policy or withdraw the most controversial parts. One anonymous MP was quoted saying, "We can't fight a general election while defending the idea that the government can freeze bank accounts. It's political suicide." Public reaction was even more intense. Talk radio exploded with furious callers. "What if I criticize the government and my account gets frozen?" one caller asked. Others warned it was just a step away from a Chinese-style social credit system. Protests were announced in front of key Labour offices, with signs reading, "Not your money, not your power." The financial sector also didn't stay silent. Bank managers and private investors began issuing quiet warnings to their clients. Some began pulling assets from UK-based platforms to foreign banks, just in case. Though no crash occurred, the signs of nervousness were clear. Consumer rights groups joined the wave. A coalition of civil liberty organizations, tech privacy advocates, and small business groups released a joint statement condemning the proposal. They said, "This plan would give the state unchecked access to our financial lives. It must be rejected in its current form." Starmer tried to fight back. His team released statements claiming the backlash was based on misinformation and deliberate fearmongering by right-wing media. They promised clearer language in the next draft and emphasized that no account could be frozen without clear cause. But the damage was already done. People weren't just worried, they were angry. Even in mainstream media, once neutral commentators began questioning whether Labour was now drifting into dangerous territory. Some articles compared Starmer's plan to historic examples where governments abused financial power to punish political enemies. Others questioned why such a sweeping plan had not gone through deeper consultation or debate before being floated. What had started as a reform proposal had now become a full-blown political crisis. Starmer was standing at the edge of a credibility cliff, and his next decision would either bring him back from it, or push him over the edge. Keir Starmer has spent years crafting an image of control, calm leadership, and trustworthiness. But this crisis, sparked by what many now call his bank power grab, is shaking the very foundation of that reputation. For a man preparing to lead his party into a general election, the timing could not be worse. And the damage could be deeper than it appears. First, there's the issue of trust. Starmer's appeal has always been that he isn't reckless. Unlike some past leaders, he's presented himself as stable, grounded, and policy-driven. But this proposal, especially the emergency clause allowing account freezes without court oversight, created the impression that he was willing to overstep for control. Once the public begins to question a leader's motives, rebuilding trust is incredibly hard. Second, he's handed his opponents a powerful narrative. The Conservatives and Reform UK are now painting him as a future Prime Minister who would weaponize financial institutions against the people. Even if the plan is revised or withdrawn, the phrase "Starmer tried to freeze your bank account" will echo in political ads, debates, and on social media. Third, he's now alienated parts of his own base. Younger voters who care about digital privacy, civil liberties, and freedom from surveillance are feeling betrayed. At the same time, older Labour loyalists, especially small business owners and pensioners, are worried about the state interfering with their hard-earned money. When your own supporters are confused or upset, that's a dangerous signal. There's also the question of leadership judgment. Political analysts are asking, how did this policy get this far without proper internal warnings? Who signed off on it? And why wasn't the controversial clause removed before it became public? The misstep is raising doubts about how decisions are being made in Starmer's circle. If he wins power, will his team be this careless with real national laws? Critics are also highlighting the bigger pattern. This isn't the first time Starmer has been accused of centralizing power or silencing opposition voices within his party. Now, combined with financial control mechanisms, the picture becomes more troubling. It's not just about one policy, it's about the direction he's taking Labour, and finally, there's the timing. With an election possibly months away, this crisis is stealing the spotlight from Labour's key messages on the NHS, education, and cost of living. Instead of talking about fixing Britain's problems, the media is now focused on whether Starmer poses a threat to financial freedom. That's a disastrous shift in narrative. Political missteps are part of leadership. But some mistakes cut deeper than others. Starmer has walked into a trap of his own making, and it's one that's difficult to escape from without losing something: his momentum, his credibility, or even his shot at number 10. Now the question is no longer just, what happens next? It's, can Starmer recover it all, before the public makes up its mind? The fallout from Starmer's bank account proposal is still unfolding, but already, the road ahead looks difficult and dangerous. What happens next could decide not only the future of this policy, but the entire direction of Starmer's political career. Behind the scenes, Labour insiders are scrambling to contain the damage. There are talks of rewriting the proposal entirely, removing the emergency clause, and even issuing a formal apology to the public. Some party strategists are urging Starmer to step forward and admit the mistake openly, hoping that honesty might soften public anger. But others warn that doing so could be seen as weak, something that could be even more damaging just months before an election. Parliament is preparing to debate the issue in a heated session. Opposition leaders are lining up to demand answers. Legal experts have been invited to weigh in. The Bank of England may even send representatives to speak publicly, something that rarely happens. If the debate gets televised or goes viral on social media, it could further amplify the embarrassment and make it harder for Starmer to pivot away. Meanwhile, the Bank of England is not backing down. In fact, it's moving to strengthen its position. Reports suggest the bank is exploring legal protections that would block any future government from bypassing its independence. If those protections pass, it would be a clear message to any future prime minister: don't try this again. Internationally, investors and observers are watching closely. Credit rating agencies may begin reassessing their outlook on the UK's political stability. This could lead to increased borrowing costs or tighter investment flows into the country, real economic consequences tied directly to political uncertainty. Starmer's proposal, meant to show leadership, is now being viewed as a risk by the global market. For the public, the fear hasn't faded. Protests are scheduled in London, Manchester, and several other cities. Organizers are calling this the start of a financial freedom movement. Online petitions demanding the proposal be scrapped have already gained hundreds of thousands of signatures. If Starmer doesn't act soon, this could grow into a larger movement, one that challenges not just a policy, but his entire vision of leadership. Some in the Labour Party are now whispering about leadership questions. If the backlash continues and polling numbers drop, will the party still see Starmer as the one to take them over the finish line? Or will internal voices start calling for a change, quietly at first, then more loudly as the election nears? At the same time, Starmer is weighing his options. He could try to reframe the narrative, double down on his position, and push through the revised and safer version of the policy. Or he could drop the idea completely, take the hit, and move on to safer ground. But either path carries risk. The public is alert now. The Bank of England is watching. And his opponents have more ammunition than ever. So what happens next? Will Keir Starmer pull back and repair the damage, or charge forward and risk everything on a financial reform that could define, or destroy, his legacy? The clock is ticking. Stay tuned for more updates on this breaking story. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for real-time political coverage that cuts through the noise.